Hi, and welcome to What I Read in April. It's supposed to be warm outside, and it's not. So, first book I read in April was Dreams of a Great Small Nation by Kevin J. McNamara. It's about the founding of Czechoslovakia, which is a period of history I really didn't know anything about. So this was very informative, very interesting, and it was very well written because I was always kind of waiting to the next chapter to see what was going on. So I have been meaning to read this book for about the past 5 years. Finally got around to it. And I loved it. I knew it was going to be good because I like BJ Novak. But I'm just going to read you one of the stories, which is why I'm flipping through here. One is called Kindness Among Cakes. Child, why does carrot cake have the best icing? Mother, because it needs the best icing. This story is called If You Love Something. If you love something, let it go. If you don't love something, definitely let it go. Basically, just drop everything. Who cares? Salt to the Sea has been getting a lot of press recently. It's about 4 refugees on the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is my best attempt at pronouncing that name, which is a boat that sinks and 5,000 people on board drown. So it's not like a happy story. It's written from 4 characters' perspectives, each fleeing for their own reasons. They need to get on this boat, they need to get out. And it's very good about talking about the people whose lives are impacted by war. The 4-person narrative style did annoy me a little bit because sometimes you left characters in certain situations, and as they got separated, you didn't really know what was going on in that character's life, so you kind of had to skip forward a little bit. So that annoyed me, but I was able to get past that because it's still a brilliant book. The next book I read was called Mendelssohn is on the Roof. One of the things that made me pick it up and actually buy it was reading the author's biography, and I'm just going to read this to you, right? He was born in 1900 in Prague, was one of the best-known writers in Central Europe in the 1930s and the immediate post-war years. He had been a militant communist in his youth, but was later expelled from the party after having served in Moscow as a member of the Czech section of the Comintern. In 1942, he escaped transportation to the death camps by faking his own death. I have so many questions, and none of them were answered by his Wikipedia page. This particular book is about an SS officer who is ordered by Heydrich to remove a statue of Mendelssohn from the roof of an opera house. Problem is, he doesn't know which statue is Mendelssohn because he's never seen Mendelssohn. So he thinks we'll remove the statue with the biggest nose. That statue is of Wagner. And it goes from there. It's part parody, part tragedy, and it speaks again about how war and occupation just affects so many different lives in so many ways. So Rebel Queen has been sitting on my shelf for 6 or 7 years. Finally read it. It is about an uprising in India just as the British were taking over that I had no idea about. It was led by Queen Lakshmi. And it was in Jhansi, and this was really interesting. The Queen of Jhansi has this special all-female guard unit, and this book is told from the perspective of one of the guards. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. It really captured, I think, what life was like for people in India, and especially for women in India in the 19th century, during the period where India was starting to lose its independence to a company. I think any book that inspires me to learn more about an event is a good book. So, A Sin by Any Other Name came out at the beginning of this month. It is by Reverend Robert Lee. He is a descendant of the famous Robert E. Lee, who led the Confederate Army during the Civil War. This is a book that tries to reckon with the South's racist heritage and how Southerners deal with that racist heritage in that they basically sweep it under the rug. But it was very interesting because it's all kind of a memoir about how he himself came to change his views on what the South was, what it stood for, and in general, how we need to change how we talk about the Civil War. The Confederacy is part of the South's heritage as they see it, and that part of the Confederacy that was fighting to uphold slavery, which was, of course, all of it, is kind of swept under the rug in favor of more vague terms like states' rights. And this was really interesting on how someone growing up in the South with no generally racist views could still be swept up in the whole lost cause, rebels, Confederacy rhetoric. Obviously, Reverend Lee is a preacher. And so there's a lot in this book about how God and Christianity and the Bible really shaped how he views social justice. And that was also very interesting and very refreshing because I think a lot of Christianity is being marred by conservatism. And so it's very nice to see someone saying, well, that's not what it's about. Next book I read was Killing Commendatore by Murakami. I gotta be honest, I was disappointed by this book. I think because I have such a high standard for Murakami, I just thought it wasn't up to the standard that I have expected from him in the past. It was still very good. It's about an artist who goes and lives in this other retired artist's house and discovers this painting called Killing Commendatore that was never released to the public, and it's very fraught with emotion. And then about 100 pages in, the commendatore from the painting shows up in the artist's bedroom and just goes, "Hi, I'm here, I'm an idea." And that was when the magical realism set in. But I thought there were some weird scenes in here that they were just kind of odd. I don't quite know how else to describe it. It wasn't odd in a profound way. They were just odd and slightly uncomfortable. But I enjoyed reading it. I just was expecting better, I guess, from Murakami. But the cover's cool. So I picked up The Readers of Broken Wheel Recommend this month. And one of the reasons I picked it up, I love books about bookstores and readers and book clubs. I think they're really cute and fluffy, and they're always nice to read about other people who like reading, even if they're all fictional. But this one in particular takes place in Broken Wheel, Iowa. And when I read Iowa anywhere in a fiction book, I'm like, whoo, let's do that. Local. The problem is that this author is not local. She's from Sweden, and so her main character is also from Sweden and moves to Iowa, or rather comes to Iowa to visit a friend, and then discovers that her friend has died. And so the person she was there to visit is no longer living. So she then slowly befriends the town and decides to open up a bookshop in the town to kind of help revive it. From the outset, it sounded good, but I thought the characters were a little bit flimsy. I didn't feel like I really knew any of the characters, and their motivations seemed very superficial, and the pairings that ended up happening in the book seemed to happen very quickly with almost no chemistry between the characters at all. So that was disappointing. And the second thing was that I felt like this author had just Googled Iowa, basically had looked on the Wikipedia page and gone, okay, I-80 is the main highway, state tree is the oak tree. They had a couple governors, Chet Culver and Terry Branstad, and that seemed to be all. Like, there wasn't a lot that I felt that was truly Iowan. So the next book I read was A Gentleman in Moscow, and this book has also been getting a lot of press recently. So this centers on Count Rostov, who in 1922 is sentenced to live forever in a hotel. He's never allowed to leave the hotel. and you follow his life at the hotel, the kind of small town quibbles, the way the Bolshevik uprising and subsequent Soviet takeover really changes the landscape of Russia that Count Rostov once knew. And he himself is just a very good narrative voice. It's very funny, but polite and really reminiscent of the kind of high society upper crust that has been left behind after the revolution. So this was very, very enjoyable. Final book I read in April was Killers of the Flower Moon. So this is about the Osage murders and the birth of the FBI when J. Edgar Hoover first took over. And this, again, talked about a period of history that I really didn't know much about. So in the 1920s, a bunch of members of the Osage Nation were being murdered. And the local police and the local judges were kind of dismissing it. The Osage's reservation happened to be over a huge oil reserve. And so a lot of members of the Osage tribe were millionaires. They were really rich because they owned the oil, and so they could sell it to developers, and they therefore were getting a lot of money from the oil that was underneath their land. Then they start turning up dead, and other white people are coming to claim their millions. And so the FBI got involved, and they tracked down, it was a huge conspiracy, basically, where they tracked down a group of people, and one guy in particular who was responsible for it all, and was ordering all these murders to make themselves wealthy. This book will make you furious at historical injustices and present injustices. So that is it for the books I read in April. I will link all the books that I read down below. I also recently created a Goodreads profile, so you can friend me and follow me and stuff down there to see what I'm reading and what's on my list to read. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have read any of these books in the comments, or if you would like to read any of these books, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!